Well, the Commonwealth Bank have hit headlines for the wrong reasons recently, saying that they are going to further increase their already pre-existing restrictions on people being able to access Bitcoin and be able to move their money into Bitcoin or altcoin digital coin exchanges. They say that it's to protect people. They say that it's to reduce fraud. But my next guest thinks that perhaps there might be a bigger picture in play based on his own previous experiences. We've spoken with him before here on the Aussie Wire. Crispin Rovere, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Oh, thanks for having me, Toby.
Now, for those that may have missed your previous interviews, why is it that you might have a perspective on the Commonwealth Bank restricting people's access to their own money?
Well, I have had interesting experiences with the banks. I'm a professional poker player. And for me, this all came out of nowhere when I tried to deposit $2,000 cash into my own bank account with Westpac, into my own account. And as a consequence, the banks froze all of my accounts and demanded I provide proof of the history of my transactions and where the money was sourced from in order to unlock those funds. So we're not talking hundreds of thousands of dollars money laundering legislation, anything like that. It was simply a mechanism of control.
Mm,
And this happened again, even after I resisted that
mm.
pressure. But now it's been resolved, but now much more focused on the various ways in which banks are trying to control and influence people and try and curb their own spending and financial transactions that may be outside their own control.
Well, we certainly reported on that at the time. We're grateful that you came on here at the Aussie Wire. Other outlets also reported on it. And as a result of that reporting, we did have a number of other people coming forward and sharing their own stories. Yours was certainly not an isolated incident. And so, in that context, I think you could be forgiven for having a bit of a skeptical view of this. This is the letter that circulated on X in the last couple of days, talking about the fact that a specific transaction for this specific customer was declined, ostensibly in order to protect them from themselves and from potentially being scammed. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's definitely not about scams. There are many different scams that exist out there, and even by their own publications, that the total volume of cryptocurrency scams in Australia amounted to around $200 million. Now, that's not nothing,
Mm,
but compared to the huge sums of money that goes through crypto exchanges, it is very small indeed. If I was to steel man their argument, they do have anti-money laundering requirements and things like that. They don't want to pay up.
sure.
But clearly, it's mostly about trying to evolve competition. They want currency to be pushed through Australian dollars. They want transactions to be visible in Australian dollars.
Mm.
And they're concerned that as Bitcoin becomes more and more popular, that may eventually create another form of competition, one that they don't have visibility on.
Mm. Well, we've seen this sort of narrative used in the past. We're protecting you from yourself. This is a headline here from the Altcoin Buzz website, just setting out some details here and just going into the detail of a statement by the CBA about this policy, which I'll remind you again is not a new policy. It's a tightening of a pre-existing policy. Under this policy, CBA customers will face a monthly limit on the amount they can spend on Bitcoin purchases. This measure is designed to prevent excessive speculation. That strikes me as something a bank should have no say over. And potential financial distress resulting from a sudden market downturn. Again, not the bank's business, not the bank's problem. That's your money. And the bank cites protecting customers from crypto risks like volatility, loss, and scams as its rationale. Now, you've already kind of addressed scams there. What do you make of this protecting you from volatility, protecting you from potentially losing your money argument?
Well, there's two things to be said about that. There's many different forms of investment that are highly volatile.
Mm,
And strangely, the Commonwealth Bank isn't restricting those that they stand to make money from in terms of their own security exchanges.
mm,
They simply are focusing on crypto. And also, it's not just the limits they're placing on crypto. They're doing other things as well. So at the time that they first introduced those restrictions, they blocked uh, money through various crypto exchanges, including the largest exchange in Australia, Binance. And they also make these purchases slow and difficult.
mm,
Just like when you transfer money to others, sometimes it can take days, many business days to go through. Well, they do that routinely with crypto purchases as well.
mm,
And if you're a crypto investor, that could be seriously deleterious. So they're trying to pressure people not to invest in crypto at all. So it's not just the limits they're placing on it, it's the difficulty of actually engaging in that at all, which has nothing to do with speculation. It's purely to try and get people out of the crypto markets when they're
Mm.
operating from Australia.
Well, Bitcoin has recently been on a very much a bull run. You can see that to the very right-hand
Mm.
side of your screen there, having exceeded 100,000 Australian dollars for the first time. Now, it's worth noting only not so long ago it was up around 90,000. The volatility argument, well, you can see it there. There is certainly something to be said about a volatility issue there. However, taken as a bigger picture, this is actually the fastest growing asset class in human history. If you look at the rate at which its market cap is growing, I was very skeptical, I'll be honest, of Bitcoin and all digital coins until 2015 when I was in Venezuela with my wife, and we saw in Caracas City the absolute devastation and poverty that hyperinflation of their fiat currency had brought upon that entire country. And we met people who now lived their entire lives in Bitcoin. They insisted on being paid in Bitcoin. They paid all of their bills in Bitcoin. They wouldn't do business with someone unless they could do it in Bitcoin. And that was how they were protecting themselves against inflation. I have to note here that this quite extraordinary run in increased values is coinciding with an increase in inflation in most fiat currencies around the world. Do you think that there is a link there where people are beginning to turn to Bitcoin as a hedge against that inflation?
You've articulated that extremely well, Topher. Yes, one of the great advantages of cryptocurrencies, particularly Bitcoin, is the control against inflation because there's an absolute cap on the amount of Bitcoin that we created. There can be no
Mm,
government that tries to manufacture dollars to spin their way out of financial trouble. It's
mm,
all done through market price. And that's one of the reasons that people trust crypto
mm,
as a means of exchange. So, absolutely, that is one of the reasons why it has been appreciating in value and it's stood the test of time. I mean, as you say early on, skepticism because
sure.
there are a lot of things that could crush it, and yet people have kept with it, and more people are using it, particularly as you say in those underdeveloped economies or economies that are experiencing inflation.
Mm,
And as a consequence, it's now become part of the financial landscape, which again is one of the reasons that the Australian banks are so frightened of it, because the Australian market is somewhat unique in that we are highly advanced but also isolated. You know, Australian dollars are one of the most highly exchanged currencies in the world, and yet it's not accepted anywhere outside of Australia.
sure.
So if you are going to be a guinea pig for trying to crush crypto, Australia is the market that you would try and do it first. And so I'm deeply skeptical of some of the measures that are being put in place for
Mm,
exactly the reasons you've described. As Bitcoin proves its value, not just in speculation, but also in everyday purchases,
mm.
there is a potential in the future that more and more people in advanced economies will want to use Bitcoin for the means of exchange, for its speed, for its reliability, for its inflation controls, for its appreciation and value.
Mm.
And consequently, the banks could be threatened in their market control. So I think this is all about protecting their market share.
Yeah, look, I'm instinctively inclined to agree with you. I'm certainly no expert when it comes to crypto or to Bitcoin, but if you just look at the bigger picture, it certainly seems that way. One of the things that struck me about this argument against Bitcoin based on volatility, you can see here the Bitcoin chart. Let me show you an alternative chart. This is the Australian dollar since 1966. And you can't accuse it of being volatile. It is consistently moving in a single direction. So volatility, clearly not a problem for the Australian dollar. But it has to be noted that actually when it was created in 1966, it had 13.6 times the purchasing power that it has today. To say that a different way, a $100 basket of goods in 1966 would now set you back $1,360. And that's assuming that the official inflation figures are correct, which I'm very skeptical of. And I think that in reality, inflation has been running at least double the official figures. And when you compound that, that becomes quite an extraordinary difference between what we see here. Nevertheless, even just based on what we see here, I know which one I would rather be holding on to. The Australian dollar and fiat currencies don't seem to be performing so well. Do you think that there's going to be an official move against crypto if people really do start to abandon these fiat currencies? Do you think we could see it move from the banks up to an actual regulatory level?
So this is where I am quietly optimistic
Okay.
because I think it's failing. I think what the banks are trying to do, it relies a lot on public attitude and public support. So
Mm,
if you can make uh, Bitcoin seem dodgy, if you can make it seem stigmatized, that only people who are speculators or criminals or dodgy types are engaging in it,
Mm.
then people will naturally gravitate towards what they know, which is
Mm.
the traditional currencies. But more and more ordinary retail mums and dad type investors are getting involved in Bitcoin. They are becoming more educated about blockchain. And as such, it relies on the public support. If there is no public support for it, then people can find ways around it. And if enough people do, then it will ultimately fail and be abandoned. So
Mm.
at the moment, the kind of guinea pig that is the Australian market, which is probably the best market for other advanced economies to look at in terms of regulatory controls, because it does have this currency that is specific to Australia. It has a population that can't move around like you can in Europe and the United States.
Mm.
So if you were going to restrict it, Australia would be the place. But even in Australia, it's falling over. So
Mm.
I think with some quiet confidence, it could be moving in a more freedom positive direction.
Mm. Well, we'll certainly keep an eye on this story, as we have been over the last year since we were created here at the Aussie Wire, and we'll continue to bring you back on for updates as this develops. Thank you so much, Crispin Rovere.
Thanks as always.